Thank you for joining us. Our special guest today is Dr. Sears, the founder of the Center for Health and Wellness at the Sears Institute for Anti-Aging Medicine in Royal Palm Beach, Florida. His cutting-edge therapies and reputation for solving some of the most difficult-to-diagnose cases attract patients from all over the world. Dr. Sears is a pioneer and one of the first to be board certified in anti-aging medicine and will shed light on these essential subjects following these messages.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
With us now is Dr. Sears. Al, it's such a pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You know, I've been reading about you and looking at your material. It's pretty amazing. And just to catch you off guard, I read a book called Confessions of a Medical Heretic by Dr. Mendelsohn. He was, I think, the president of the AMA at some point, and to everyone's horror, he turned his back and criticized Big Pharma and so forth. And here you are with a whole career of pioneering. Tell us about it a little.
Well, that's very generous of you to compare me to him and to use the word pioneer. I do consider myself a different point of view. I have a predisposition that came not so much from medicine, but from being a farmer and being a nutritionist, that then I brought that with me to medicine. So I had a little bit of a different perspective from the beginning. But really, I think what made me kind of break ranks was not really so much over the treatment, but I do have differences in my treatments than most doctors in orthodoxy. But it was more over the ethics of the whole thing. It is my contention that a doctor and a patient are partners, not a commander and a subordinate. I don't bark orders to my patients, and that became difficult for me in residency. You weren't supposed to ask the patient if they wanted to have surgery. As a matter of fact, that was a big problem. I was in charge of pre-oping patients, and I would always ask them, has somebody explained to you what's going to happen, and do you want this? What? I have a choice? Well, no, I don't want the surgery. So you can imagine how that played out in the orthopedic wards. But it was over that ethical issue of autonomy. John Stuart Mill said over his own body, a man's autonomy is absolute. And medicine wants to take that from you. If you don't believe me, God forbid, you should have the bad luck of winding up in a hospital. You are treated like a child, like a prisoner, and you are given orders, and if you resist, they put a curse on you. Well, I can't be responsible for the heart attack you're going to have if you don't take this drug. And the whole system is built on that wrong-minded ethic. The highest principle of medicine is not beneficence, it's autonomy. You have to respect the autonomy of the individual, and you work with them. It's more like a cooperative dance than an engineering project.
Interesting. Maybe that's why I always leave hospitals AMA.
Yeah, I know. I've done the same thing with my son. When my son was born, it was a fight from the very beginning. Whose child do you think this is? It doesn't belong to you because he was born in a hospital. That's my son. And I eventually signed him out, AMA.
Sir, how is your clinic different from so many other clinics in this country?
By the way, to finish up on that point, it shows how much the thinking has become distorted to believe that you have to sign out AMA against medical advice. You don't. Who can make you? Says who? You want to leave a hospital, you get up and you leave. You're not in prison. But everybody is convinced of that. Even the hospital workers are convinced that they somehow have authority over you in that regard. Who gave that to them? There's no law. You want to leave a hospital, you get up and you leave. They can't stop you. But they believe they can, and sometimes they might even try, but they have no legal right.
And of course, a sad fact. I'd like to ask you about stem cell therapy, which has been controversial for years, and now they're about to implement some new rules, I believe, very shortly. What's your position on that?
Yes, it has had an interesting history. I thought for a time, as many of my colleagues did, that this might be a chance for us to get out from under the heel of repressive orthodoxy through the AMA. You can only do what they approve. And they use a very heavy hand to enforce that, including the threat of taking away a doctor's license or even imprisonment. They have taken raids on doctors who gave vitamins with guns drawn and like a SWAT team, using the power of the government to stop people from using alternative methods of healing with no evidence of harm, just that they were violating orthodoxy.
Big interests.
Yes, and we thought with stem cells, because they are so advanced in comparison to drugs, because they are nature's repair kit. They are the body's own first responders. They go to where there's damage from aging or chronic disease or injury, and they set up a traffic directing system, and they bring nutrients and additional cells that are tailor-made and ingenious in how they can rebuild new tissue. They replace parts. But there's a bigger problem, and that is that since those are embryonic cells, they can develop into any kind of cell line, including immune-competent cells. And that has a big potential side effect because those cells can attack you, what we call graft versus host disease, which is very dangerous and a very bad side effect to have. So we would never use those. We use your own. So if you think about it, this is the perfect opportunity for the AMA and the FDA to back off a bit because we're only doing it for people's own cells. And clearly, everybody can agree that you own the cells in your own body, right? They're your property. If you don't own that, what can you own in this world? So we thought maybe, after a couple of years of perfecting these things and getting them to work and finding that they were cures for diseases that we previously thought were incurable, like heart disease, like diabetes, like Alzheimer's, great potential there, and again, decades ahead of drug therapy. But when Trump was elected, everyone thought that maybe this is an anti-central control kind of new administration. And we had a lot of hope with Scott Gottlieb, who was the first appointee by Trump to be in charge of healthcare. And we thought, yeah, now maybe there will be a more liberal approach and, let 1,000 flowers bloom and get some creative competition in medicine, which is very sorely lacking in conventional medicine. But much to my chagrin, one of the first things that Dr. Gottlieb decided to do was conduct a war on stem cells. He actually went on TV and saying how proud he was to shut down these charlatans that were putting people in danger by using people's own stem cells, what he calls an unapproved drug. So now the cells that are in your body are regarded as unapproved drugs by the FDA.
How interesting is that? Now, you actually were inspired by another pioneer, my dear friend Bill Falloon, who founded Life Extension Foundation back in the day, and life extension is so much in the forefront of research these days. Tell us how Bill and life extension influenced you.
Yes, and that's how you and I become connected, was through Bill. And yeah, it had a big influence on me. I was about 15 years old at home in southern Ohio watching TV, and I saw on, I think, the Merv Griffin show, a pioneer of integrative nutritional therapy, Dirk Pearson, who was one of the early founders of the whole movement with Life Extension Foundation. And he was talking about phosphatidylcholine and inositol and phosphatidyl compounds that could be used as supplements that would influence brain power. He was saying you could affect IQ and affect age-related memory decline. And it really influenced me. I thought, wow, now there's somebody else. There's at least one other person in the world that believes in the power of nutrition to heal. So I kind of searched for anything that he was related to. And we didn't have the internet then, but you could go to the library, you could do searches on Silver Platter and look for research and search periodicals. And I found he was involved in a few lawsuits, and I found the connection there to Life Extension Foundation, and I tracked them for years. As a matter of fact, when I got out of medical school and I formed my first business was just associated with the practice. It was a kind of an integrated practice. But the second company I formed was a foundation. And I did it very much after the model of Life Extension Foundation. We made our Wellness Research and Consulting Foundation. That was a not-for-profit that we looked for information about how to improve wellness and age-related decline. And that's interesting, that was right before the founding of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So when they came to me, I already had that foundation, and everything else that I've done since then was under that foundation.
This is most interesting. I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these commercial messages. We'll be right back. While visiting the Sears Institute, we saw state-of-the-art treatment facilities for stem cells, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, cutting-edge IV laser therapy, and more. We're back with Dr. Sears. So you have this very interesting summit coming up again. Tell our audience about it.
Yes, we feel very fortunate to have made some contacts with some leading people in the field of regenerative medicine and anti-aging. We're bringing all those people together. I think it'll be the best regenerative medicine there's ever been. We have some of the big stars from 3 different categories we're trying to bring all together. The first one is really this notion that in order to do effective regenerative medicine, you kind of have to have a good solid base of health. And we have drifted way far away from that with industrial production of food, with dependency on drugs and the whole interventionist sick care system, that we don't really have a sound foundation that we can build effective anti-aging. So the first part of that conference will be what we call primal health. Primal means prototypical, or what's become popular as paleo, where we have to shift our diet and our nutrition back to what the human body has evolved to expect. There are certain nutrients, certain balances of categories of foods that we ate for a million years that now suddenly we don't. So we see a connection between the altered diet in the modern world and chronic diseases like cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's and allergies and behavioral problems in children. They're all connected to that same changing environment. So in order to address those things, what you need to do before you can get to regenerative and anti-aging medicine, we have to kind of reset the natural conditions. So we have a group of speakers that are going to be talking about what is natural, what is paleotypical, and rebuilding that base. And then the next category is over the issue of telomeres, telomere biology, telomerase therapy, which is a very exciting discovery in anti-aging, that we can actually affect the control of the aging program through the telomere and telomere biology. We can talk more about that. I don't want to get too technical, but it is a game changer. And we have the best in the world coming to talk about. As a matter of fact, we're having my friend, Dr. Bill Andrews, who discovered the telomerase gene in humans, the H-TERT gene, about a decade ago, and has been working hard to get that into the hands of people for anti-aging ever since.
I just had the privilege of interviewing him like a few weeks ago.
Dr. Andrews.
Yes, and also another attendee, I had the pleasure of interviewing Newt Gingrich as well a while ago. Tell us more about the individuals you're expecting at your summit.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Newt. I feel very lucky that we have him. And that's really the third part that I hadn't got to yet, is that we're having part of the conference about health access, about health freedom, about your right to choose the kind of health care that you have. And as you know from your interview, Newt has been a pioneer in that field. He's been a advocate of individual rights and freedoms, and part of that is health freedom. So he heads up that section about why you should have your own individual choices about the health care that you.
Things are changing so rapidly at the present time in history, in your field especially. And there are so many other clinics. What differentiates your practice from others?
I think that's a great question, and I do believe there's a big difference. I would say most anti-aging centers focus on aging as if it were disease, as if this is nature's mistake. Our contention is that aging is perfectly normal. It's not a disease. It happens to everyone, so I'm not sure how they get away with defining it as a disease. Diseases are abnormalities. The natural circumstance is health and wellness. So we consider aging as a natural part of the biological program that plays itself out. And that changes everything, because we don't think it's possible to look at all these sequelae of aging, all these downstream effects, and change every one of them. It's too complex. It's like putting your finger in 1,000 natural holes in the dike, and then other ones will spring up. But lucky for us, there's a control system. You age by intent. You age on purpose. It's not a broken system. It is the system operating the way it was intended to. There's evolutionary advantage to aging. So if you think of it that way, it kind of flips the whole paradigm upside down. So now what we're trying to do, rather than stop these many different sequelae of aging, we're trying to understand the natural program. If you age by intent, by design, all we have to do is figure out how and intervene to tweak that mechanism. And it turns out that is exactly true, and we now know how and why you age. You age because there's a genetic program that starts at conception that counts the number of cell divisions. You don't have an absolute clock that tells how many days or years you've been alive, but you have a relative clock that counts the number of cell divisions. Every time your cells divide, there's a portion of the terminal end of the chromosome that is not replicated in the next generation. So in contrast to what they taught us in biology, daughter cells are not identical to the parent cell. They are different in one important regard. They have a shorter terminal portion of the chromosome called the telomere. So that's like a computer program that every time it cycles, it's N-1, N-1. It's doing a countdown. And as those cells get shorter telomeres, they make the chromosome fold in a different way, and it unfolds and reveals different parts of the chromatin so that different genes are transcribed. There's an enzyme called telomerase that rebuilds that terminal portion of the telomere and resets the genetic clock at 0. And it stays active in your sperm cells for men and in egg cells for women. It continually resets the clock at each cell division so that it stays at 0. So, aha. Therein lies the key to effective, universal anti-aging. Nature has already done it for us, and it does it in all of us. We have cells that are 0 years old that still reside inside of us, and it occurs through this enzyme called telomerase. Not only there's cause and effect with telomere length and age, but that it's not a one-way street. That you can take an old individual, lengthen their telomeres, and reverse changes that have already occurred. And all of the things that were measured reversed. Amazing things like when a mouse gets old, it loses olfactory sense and it can't find its food anymore. These old mice had that problem. They reversed the telomere length and youthful smell came back. They couldn't perform in mazes because of shrinkage of the brain. Not only did their function come back to youthful levels of brain function, but the atrophy of the brain, they had lost 30% of their brain size, that actually reversed. Think about it. You can regrow a shrinkled up old brain by reversing the length of the telomeres.
Absolutely fascinating. Share with us some of the misconceptions people have with regard to aging.
Well, I think the biggest one is that aging is somehow a mistake, that it's nature being broken. And we need science, we need doctors to come along and correct the ignorance and the mistakes of nature. I don't think that that's a productive way to look at it, and I think it just gets further and further down the rabbit hole. Whenever I look at a supplement or a treatment and I consider whether it's healthy, I use that kind of an intuitive litmus test. How does this relate to what nature intended? It's so much more effective to understand nature and partner with it than to think of nature as the enemy that you have to overcome. We know how and why aging occurs, and we can use nature's tools to affect the control point of that. I use much the same approach. Say somebody comes to me with diabetes. It accelerates aging, so it's necessary if I'm going to be effective at anti-aging to cure that underlying chronic disease. And instead of looking at blood sugar, because that's a very late sequelae where your blood sugar comes up, we have to look at the production of insulin by the beta islet cells in the pancreas. And it turns out that when your body notices that you eat too much carbohydrate and that it's overtaxing the innate capacity for those cells in the pancreas to produce insulin, it addresses that problem for a time, and it does it very well by cloning those cells that produce insulin. But remember that trick of the telomere, that there's a counter that counts down. That affects individual cell lines as well as all of the cells in your body to cause generalized aging. Many of the diseases of elders, like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, are also a consequence of losing telomere length, because those beta islet cells in the pancreas can only divide and clone themselves to produce more and more insulin because of an abnormal diet for a certain period of time. And then the telomere gets too short. When there's a requirement for too much insulin, it overtaxes those beta islet cells' capacity to reproduce by shortening the telomeres until they become senescent. When the telomere gets too short, they can't divide anymore, they can't produce any more insulin. So eventually blood sugar skyrockets because you can't produce more cells to produce more insulin. Unfortunately, that's when medicine identifies the problem. is when that has already gone on for decades. So that's one of the differences in our approaches, is that we look at how nature normally solves the problem and partner with nature to reverse the cause of the disease rather than just treat the symptom.
Dr. Sears, before we conclude, I'm sure many people in our audience would love to speak with you and meet with you. How can you be reached?
Well, we have a very active website. There's a lot of good information there. We can show your viewers the website. There's also a telephone number of the Anti-Aging Center that they can call. I have a very cooperative and informed staff that will be happy to answer their questions.
Dr. Sears, it's been a real privilege and pleasure. We have to do this again soon one of these days.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'll be right back.
Human age reversal. We may be there already. Human studies are now ready to begin to confirm meaningful reversal of pathological aging processes. These clinical trials aim to alter older humans so that they function as much younger individuals. Even modest success will result in a paradigm shift that will impart enormous societal benefits, such as sparing Medicare from insolvency. Life extension is not standing idle while 5,000 Americans die each day from age-related illnesses. Joining us are physician scientists who want to hurry up these technologies to keep people from aging to death. While life extension is pushing these projects forward, we need financial help to ensure these studies are carried through to fruition.
This concludes our special show for today from On Location in Palm Beach. I'm Richard Perrott. Thank you for being with us.